And we're live. Here we are. It's the second presentation today as part of the AVConf. We're very lucky to have Patrick Boulder here, who's going to talk to us about the SHF project. Take it away, Pat.
All right, thanks, Sam. So let me talk a little bit about SHF. SHF is just an acronym that we use for a Swedish set of words that mean basically a Swedish organization of small independent companies that perform dog-related services for their clients. So it's generally small businesses, maybe 1, 2, 3, 6 people, that kind of thing. And they do things like, as you can imagine, grooming or training or dog psychology, I guess, is a big thing. Who knew? All kinds of services provided to dogs. And their owners typically, as you guys know, when you're training dogs, you typically try to train the owner as well. That's half the battle. So let me share my screen. We can start looking at some slides here. It's been a while since I actually used Hangouts. We're usually on Jitsi these days, but okay. Can you see my screen okay, everybody? Hello?
Yep, I can see it.
You can, okay.
Yeah, we sure can.
Check if I was muted or not. Okay. So, see, we have a slide here that talks about basically what SHF is. This is basically stolen from their brochure. Susanna, who's basically the project owner, and she's also a member of the organization. She's also a dog trainer herself. She couldn't be here. She put this slide together. I think this is directly from the brochure. Looks like we have some issues with some of the font being used here. But anyway, it's been in existence since 1983, and it's basically an organization, as I said, of people who provide dog-related services, and the organization itself serves to help certify as well as help market these people and their services, and essentially confirm to the clients that these people have been vetted and they're capable to do what they purport to do. There is a little video that was put together, which I guess we can look at, maybe not all of this. Oops.
Att konsumera varor och tjänster av hög kvalitet. Men resonerar vi på samma sätt? Åka till kund eller användaren. Det är inte vi. Tekniskt sett kan vem som helst kalla sig för hundhundar. I dagens Sverige saknar många hundar. Felaktigt val av hundar. Felaktigt. Det är sällan en fråga om inbyggnad, utan är ofta en bygg. Dock är skadan som sker dessa. Men precis som det finns en kravmärkning på mat, samma. K-märkning. K-märket står för erfarna, välutbildade kvalitetskontroller. Man har gått igenom filter av högt ställda krav, utbildning, erfarenhet. Resultatet är tjänster som träffar hundens och hundägarens bästa och stärker yrkesrollen hos K-märkta företag. Ett förbättrat hemfärd. Nu lanserar vi H-märket. H-märkta företag och organisationer så att du kan känna dig trygg med vem du anlitar. H-märket erhålls av branschorganisationen Sveriges hundföretagare som varit verksamt i över 30 år. Och för mer information eller för att finna dina lokala H-märkta hundföretagare besök www.sveriges.se.
Okay. So did that show up okay to everybody? Maybe it's tough to see.
I think it was easy to see. The audio was a little quiet, but yeah, obviously they had the subtitles. So
okay.
Yeah, we can maybe share the link for everybody to watch that independently as well.
Yeah, I thought it was a good thing to look at in terms of how these guys market themselves and what they're all about. It was actually well done. So anyway, so in terms of what the organization wanted to do, and by the way, this app that we're talking about has been in production for I think about 1.5 years now. The app, the website that we built for the organization, and it's got probably north of 300 users, accounts created, and I think a little bit more than 160, 170 certified members who are fully paid up and operating within the auspices of the organization. So the organization originally wanted to do this. One is basically create a system to help manage members. That's the primary goal of the website, actually. And so that includes the ability to review applications. So if I want to become a member of this, I have to submit an application online. And as part of that application, I have to provide credentials that basically say I'm certified to do what I say I can do. And it's reviewed by the board, members of the board, et cetera, and they're rejected or accepted based upon their credentials. Also, we wanted to provide an ability for visitors to find companies, to find members, find out where they, in particular, where they live, where member companies are in close proximity, so they might want to consider companies that are nearby, etc. Hidden member pages, so that's a term basically for static pages that represent information that's valuable to the users, like how they can leverage their membership to get discounts on insurance, or what we're doing about GDPR, or whatever. You know, there's probably about a dozen or more of these so-called static pages to provide information to users. So that was part of the effort. And it's not just, I'll get into static pages a little bit more further on. Export email addresses for newsletters. So that sounds like a trivial thing. It's a huge deal because this organization has been using MailChimp, and they still do, to do their primary communications to their member base. And managing email addresses with spreadsheets, et cetera, and trying to import that into MailChimp had been a major headache for these folks. So obviously we were able to automate much of that through export from the website database to MailChimp. Also, they wanted to provide the membership ability to prove that they've been validated by the organization, that they've been certified and they're a member of good standing within the organization. This organization evidently has a pretty good reputation within Sweden amongst dog owners. And so being able to certify that as a member, that my company is in good standing, I'm a member in good standing, is important to them. So working on things like that, I'll show you something about that in a minute. Again, for visitors, being able to find companies that can do what I want with my pet is important. And the last thing is something we haven't touched upon yet at all. We haven't done anything in this area, so it's an area that people are interested in. Maybe we can start working on that fairly soon. But build a mobile app for basic stuff, mostly for orientation toward a visitor. So I know this is an organization there. I trust their member companies. I want to be able to find them, see where I can have my pet serviced or whatever. And also show proof of membership if I'm a member to a prospective client, and other things that we can do in the mobile app. So that was the original list of things that they asked us to do. And we'll talk a little bit more detail about how these things operate. In addition, subsequent to that, you know, when you're working with this client, and I think probably Sam on the local support site saw this as well. When you're working with organizations that are fairly new to automation, that have grown up around paper and spreadsheet and other, you know, artifacts that they use to manage their business, you really get into, you know, how should this process work? And the initial ideas of the client are fairly often informed by how they currently work with the various tools that they're using to cobble together a process, for want of a better term. And so when they start thinking about automation, they start basically coming up with ideas very frequently that represent automating what they currently do. And so, you know, we need to help them work out how we could do it, given the fact that we have these amazing tools. So for instance, in the process development, you know, one of the first things we grappled with was, how does the application review process, how should it work? How does it work now? And how does it work when we actually have tools that will help us manage it a lot better than they were doing before? And how about recertification of members? So there's this idea that members should be recertified every year, or maybe every 2 years, which means you review their credentials. If credentials have lapsed, you ask them to update. their credentials, etc. They really have very ad hoc processes at best to do that now. And so we still haven't cracked this nut, to be honest. We haven't built in recertification into our system yet. And that will involve discussions with the organization as to how it should work. And the reason I'm going into this is some of the areas where you spend a lot of your time. Sam talked about, well, feature development is 2 hours and test development maybe 12 hours for that feature. Developing the process and working with the client and helping them understand new ways of doing it, I think is very time consuming as well, but it's very gratifying and it's very useful. And I actually enjoy it. But it's part of being a real member of a real team working with a real client that I think is part of what Agile Ventures brings to the table, to be honest. I'm a member, I've been reviewed, I've been accepted. Now I want to add a new certification because I just got trained on some other service that I can provide. How can I do that? Well, right now our system doesn't accommodate that. How can I add the fact that I'm a member, I worked for one company, I also work as a, for another company, on a per diem basis or whatever. How do I add that other company to my existing membership? That's not accommodated in the system now. So these last three things on process development, we haven't solved yet. We've only done the first. So there's still quite a bunch of work to do, and that will involve working closely with the client and how it's supposed to work. Policy development. So, part of being a member is that you have to pay a fee. You have to pay 2 fees. Actually, you have to pay a membership fee, and you have to pay what's called an H branding fee for your company, which gives your company the rights to use branding elements provided by the organization. So in the process of developing that kind of thing, you have to work out very carefully with the client, well, what happens when these membership payments happen? What happens when the membership payments expire, their annual payments? And so you start getting into trying to develop a feature, and right away you are addressing issues that had not been thought about. So this wiki page here was developed based upon a series of discussions with the client. So basically, we have to define what it is we're talking about, and then basically come up with business rules. Before we develop any line of code, we need to have serious discussions. How is this going to operate? And how does it reflect how you want the member to be affected by lapsing in payments on their fees? So anyway, I won't certainly belabor all of this, but much discussion involved with development of things like this, which is really essential to developing software if you're going to do it right. So let me see, let me go back to presenting. So lessons learned. Some of the lessons learned is that, again, as I mentioned, you have to challenge sometime in a nice way, professional way, some of the initial concepts from the client as to how they want it to work. Again, I live near Boston, Massachusetts, and if you've ever driven in Boston, some of the roads are kind of weird. And the take is that Boston paved the cow paths. Boston had a lot of cows and farms and things like that. When they first come in to create roads, they just paved where the cows used to walk, right? And it's a mess. So we don't want to pave the cow paths, right? When we develop this stuff for the client. I think focusing on data modeling as well is really important. I know a lot of people kind of say, well, we can defer that until it comes up in the design. We can spend more time talking at high levels in terms of behavior, et cetera. I find the data model to be really crucial and a great focus point for understanding the essential concepts behind the application and how it's supposed to facilitate the business domain, and also identify holes and gaps and inconsistencies. And I'll give you an example of what happened early in the project. I don't know how it happened because this is really a bonehead problem, mistake, but I shouldn't say bonehead, that's pejorative, but I think in the rush to develop something quickly. So we have a user model, right? We have users, they have accounts, they sign in, etc. We also have an application model, right? An application represents a user's application to become a member of the system. Well, somehow in the application model, the user's first name and last name was in the application, and the user's name was not in the user model. That doesn't make any sense on the face of it, right? And so we ran into a lot of problems. I think the idea was that eventually, well, I don't even actually know what the initial idea was, in fact. So we had to actually pull the name structure, if you will, out of the application, put it back in the user model. That's a really simple, obvious thing, but there are other much more subtle inconsistencies that you can uncover if you really work closely with the data model in concert with developing the concepts with the client on how the system's to work. So again, the last thing is, you may not get it right the first time. You're going to have to restructure frequently because your concepts of how the entities within the business work together will change as your thought processes and understanding of the domain model progress, and as the client's understanding of how it should work progress as well. So I think that this slide here, I think, really speaks to what you'll discover if you're working with some of these clients, and just be prepared for it because it's part of the effort. Be curious to see if anybody else has any comments on this kind of aspect with respect to these projects, but I think it's common. Okay, so where did they start from? This represents some lo-fis, if you will, that were put together by Susanna, the client product owner. And so this is the starting point, which are great, and they were perfect to get started with. What we have now doesn't necessarily look like this now, but in terms of getting the concept on paper and getting discussions going around the concept, these work really well. Okay, so where are we today? So we do have the application system in place. I did say that there are some things we need to do in terms of enhancing that, like resubmitting information reflecting a new certification that I have. Payments are in place as well. As I mentioned, there's two types of payments, membership and branding. They're annual. We have integrated with a payment processor based in Sweden called hips.com. Yeah, it's very similar to Swift and these other guys. But it's based in, those guys are based in Stockholm, so pretty easy to work with. And we allow for invoicing, credit cards, and Swish. Swish is a person-to-person payment system developed in Sweden. It's very, very prevalent in Sweden, so we accommodate that as well. The ability to see and find member companies is complete as well. We have integration with Google Maps, etc. And the member pages, as I mentioned, we have that in place as well. So an administrator can create a new member page. And the way we manage that is what I call a poor man's or do-it-yourself content management system. So High Voltage is a gem that allows you to manage static pages, pages that are not produced dynamically by the server. That's great. And also CK Editor. So you can use CK Editor as an embedded editor to build these pages. Put in graphics, put in stylistic elements, all manner of HTML and CSS, and that kind of thing. So basically, you can create these static pages via this inherent content management system that we built with the help of these tools. Email addresses export, that's done now, so it makes life a lot easier at the end of the quarter when emails are sent out to all the members. We also have the ability for a company owner to build a company view, a page for their company that visitors can be directed to. If they don't have a separate website, they can use that page as basically the website for their company. Again, they can add stylistic elements, graphics, etc. to that page. They can also specify addresses where they operate. They can also specify address where they do their business. Let's say they have work out of their home for mail purposes, physical mail purposes, etc. And that physical mail address has to be in our database, but they can specify that visibility to visitors is none. So visitors don't see that address when they go look at the company page, things like that. We talked about proof of membership and certifications. So these two things represent a couple of things we've done. The thing on the left is a proof of membership. There's Susanna there. She's obviously a member. She's a member in 391, in fact. And basically, this is something that they can produce. They can produce it and download it in JPEG format. They can print it out. They can put it, laminate it, and hang it in a lanyard over their neck if they're at a conference, things like that. The thing on the right represents their right to use branding imagery from the organization. So this is something that people typically might print out and put on the wall of their business to, again, represent that their company has been certified. Let's see, so let's talk a little bit about technology. So we're pretty vanilla Rails in our stack here. Not that we don't use JavaScript, we actually do. We have a fair amount of JavaScript. And we generally use the Rails architecture for JavaScript, which works really well. We're at 2.5.1 Ruby, Rails 5.1. We try to keep up to date. 2.5.1, I think, is the latest version of Ruby supported by Semaphore, which is our CI tool. And we're going to Rails 5.2 very soon. So we try to keep up with that stuff as it happens. Services, external services that we interact with include, as I mentioned, this hips.com. They're our payments provider. Google Maps, I'd mentioned before. We use Google's geocoding as well. Dinkers is a Swedish organization that manages events. People can go and create events, like training events that I might conduct on behalf of my company. They're very much like Eventbrite and other such event management services out there. But anyway, all we do is we fetch the events for a member's company. We do it on demand, or we do it every night using a rake task in production, just as a convenience to our member base, because many members use this Dinkers organization to manage their training events. GEMS, the usual suspects are noted here, so I won't go into those. And on testing, we have our Spec and Cucumber. And we don't have enough JavaScript right. Maybe we do have enough JavaScript right now to require Jasmine. I have to look into that. But right now we're not using Jasmine. Maybe that's the next step. Okay, so some of our projected work. I mentioned fetching these events from the Dinkers organization. We just are in the middle of getting that. I think we're kind of still calling that beta, but it's mostly complete at this point. Bitly integration. So we'd like that membership certification that I showed before. We'd like to put a link to the member's company or the member's companies on that certification, and we can't put the links as they exist now because they're too long. So I want to integrate with Bitly, which has a great API, it looks like, and put those on that image. We could use Bitly elsewhere on the site as well. Exception handling for production jobs. So right now we have jobs that run every night. We back up on production, and we also fetch the events, as I mentioned. Those are done as rake tasks, so we get the full stack of Rails if we need it. I'd like to put in there exception handling, which would include both email as well as Slack integration. We also have plans to nag our members based upon things that they should be aware of, like, for instance, their membership fee payment expiration date is coming up within 2 weeks, that kind of thing. So there's things like that that we need to add. We need to talk about what it means to be a supporting member. So we talked about members up to now as people who pay to be a member and who operate companies that provide services to clients. A supporting member is just somebody who wants to support the organization because they like dogs and they like what the organization does, etc. So how does that work? How do they donate? What does it mean to be a supportive member? We're not sure. But that's one of the organizational goals, to figure that out. Find suitable companies near the visitors. The visitor now can go and say, gee, let me select this particular municipality. Let me select this particular service that I want. Let me see what companies are in there. We'd like to be able to say, would you just show me companies near me? Show me companies near me that provide grooming, you know, that kind of thing. Show me companies near me within 5 kilometers that provide this particular service. So that would be kind of a good thing to do for the visitor, I think. We have lots of opportunities to refactor code. Caching is important. When a visitor goes to our landing page, we load a lot of stuff associated with all companies and give them a sort of a list there to play with. We also load the map with dots for each company. It takes a while. Most of it is due to the fact that we're rummaging around collecting a lot of data and combining it all together. So there's opportunities for caching to make this faster. Observer, here's another example that I like, observer pattern for membership status management. The reason I like this is that the person who put this together, Ashley, did a great job on writing up the spike that she put together. The spike has to do with using the observer pattern to help us manage membership. So membership status can change based upon, say, expiration of a payment fee. All of a sudden, you're not a member because your payment fee has expired. It's only an annual payment. In terms of updating membership status when payment expires, it's not done in a way consistent with class responsibility. It's done in a way that was expedient to do at the time. So Ashley wrote up this rather amazing description of a spike that she had put together showing how to use the observer pattern to change things in one class based upon behavior or events in another class. Hence, the observer pattern is very important. So I love this because she started actually as, it's almost a tutorial on thinking about how one does this. She starts out with solid principles, etc. I'll just quickly scan through this really quickly. And then she puts a state diagram showing her events messaging diagram, showing how it works today, what events are happening, and the response to the events by various classes. And she points out that this is not necessarily the best way to do that. And then she talks about refactoring this whole mess. She didn't call it a mess. And this is how it works after refactoring. So again, I thought she did a superb job on that. And I think we ought to, so there is an opportunity for somebody who wants to learn the observer pattern to go ahead and put a PR together that's ready to go into production. And then I mentioned the mobile app, which we haven't started on. And I think that's pretty much it. So we meet Mondays and Thursdays, 18:30 Swedish time or Central European Standard Time, 2 hours ahead, UTC. For me, it's 12:30, middle of the day, Eastern Standard Time in the US, which would be 9:30 in California, etc. And I think that's pretty much it. So let me go back to not screen sharing.
Great stuff, Pat. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you. Did I go over my time? I think I did, didn't? Wow, it's 8:29.
But I think we're kind of flexible with that. Let's see. I guess, does anybody have any questions for Pat?
It's not really a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Go ahead, Sigurd.
Yep.
Thank you. Not really a question, but I also had an idea just from listening to Patrick. We could have such short video introduction into projects. It really gave me an overview of what the project is about, and it's made me interested in the project. I'll have a look at it at my spare time and just see what it is. I've just been seeing SHF. It's also hard to just go and read about the project. So if we could have such short videos where you would just introduce the project and what informed the project, it will be nice. And I think, Patrick, you agree, because that was the first time local support was explained to you after all these years of being here.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Good point. All right, great. I'll have to get Susanna to do something. By the way, her English is superb. One of the things about working with the client, they're all Swedish, of course, and we talk to client members, board members. I'm just totally impressed how perfect their English is. Just amazing. Every one of them, everybody we've talked to. So Sweden has a great educational system, from what I can tell. That's a great idea. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's a good point that you make there, Sigurd. I've just actually just embedded the local support talk that I just gave into the README for the local support project, and but Pat's modestly thinking about getting Susanna. I think Pat gave an excellent presentation, and the video recorded here could also go into doesn't have to go to the README, but could just be made available as a resource for people who want to onboard onto the SHF project.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll definitely do that.
Did we have any questions or comments from anyone else for Pat?
Yeah. Was this the project that was using React previously, or it was a different project?
No, we haven't been using React. No.
Okay. How long has this been?
I think it's been alive for about 2 years. I started after it actually had gone live, after those lo-fis were produced, etc., and the initial version of the app went out. So it's been underway, and the original lead developer was Ashley, who's not currently active. She's had some health issues. We hope to see her back soon. But she's a very senior developer and really great to work with, actually. I hope she gets back here real soon. She's been a lot of fun.
Okay, thanks. I think I was confusing this with EduWiki, if I'm not wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, the EduWiki, if that's the term, yeah, they use React. So, to be honest, I've started to look at other tools to be. Yeah, I find myself looking at some JavaScript framework tools or maybe Elm as a way to address flaky tests, which is really bizarre. To bolt on some other technology in order to make the flaky tests go away is crazy, right? But desperate times call for desperate measures. I doubt if I'll go that way, but anyway, it doesn't make those tools.
And again, about the mobile application, I was thinking about it when you're talking about the mobile application. I didn't know, did you guys consider having a progressive web app for that? Because I don't think it really requires too much hardware on your phone. So you could have a progressive web app. If it's all about searching for nearby places, then you could go the progressive web app way. To me, it looks a bit more maintainable and it doesn't require someone to download the application.
Can you define for me what you mean by progressive web app?
Okay, so for the progressive web apps, it behaves more like an application. It looks like a native application, but it runs on the browser. So if I go to the website, I can have the mobile version of it, which looks more like a mobile application. And I have an option of pinning that to my home screen, and I can directly launch it. Or if I don't, I can still just use it. Okay, I can still just use it from my phone. If I'm not wrong, it can access location. It can access the camera. If I'm not wrong about that. But it's purely HTML, JavaScript, and CSS.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's something to think about. We, I know Susanna runs our app on her browser, on her phone, and she points out problems with stylistic. We're using Bootstrap. We're trying to be mobile first, but to be honest, as a developer, I don't pay a lot of attention to that. So maybe going back and just reviewing our current architecture and enhancing it to do what you're doing, what you're talking about, Sagu, makes sense. That would probably be a good starting point. We did turn off TurboLinks at one point because we were having problems, and I think TurboLinks would probably need to be enabled to really enhance that app. But anyway, something to think about.
Okay, thank you.
TurboLinks can also make it seem almost like native if you use it intelligently on the mobile side. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm just curious if anybody else has any experience with developing apps for clients where the client thinks they know what they want to do, and the client will typically sometimes approach you with the solution first, as opposed to what's the problem domain. So really working with the client carefully, respectfully, etc. But and also challenging yourself to come up with concepts as to how to do it faster and better and easier, as opposed to just paving the cow paths, as I mentioned.
Yeah. I once had a client who came to us with a template of HTML and CSS, and he was like, okay, you guys just put in the words, I'll pay you.
There's my app, huh?
Yeah.
What are you hiring me for?
Well, yeah, exactly. That was my question.
Well, the reason I like that though is developers tend to think of themselves as technologists. The fact is, we're not. We're also business consultants. We're process developers. We're people who are supposed to think about the business domain and intelligent application of technology to the business domain. And a lot of technical talks or development talks don't really talk about that much, which I think is absolutely critical to doing the right thing and the intelligent thing for the client. All right, then.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly got anecdotes and things to chat about there. I just wanted, yeah, but do we have any other questions from anyone else? Anyone else here? I don't think we have any from on the stream, but other people who are here in real time, that's your special chance to ask any sort of clarifying questions on the talk or anything else that you might want to know to get involved with the SHF project. I guess you've been fantastically clear, Pat. Certainly it all made sense to me, and yeah, hopefully we can make the slides also available in the chat room there for everyone. I was just going to echo what you were saying there about you know, the importance of kind of working with the client. I think it's sort of all levels and scales. You have this issue of people sort of perceiving a solution, and I think the real trick is kind of reading the emotional atmosphere. Is the client or whoever it is that you're working with in a position where, like based on how much pressure they've got on them, like, can they be introduced to a sort of a broader view where they're ready to think about different options, or are they not ready for that yet? I think sometimes if they're under a lot of pressure, they kind of they may see trying to introduce another idea as a kind of a resistance of what it is that they want, and that can be you know, is it damaging for the relationship, or that's probably too strong maybe, but that's I think on top of what you're saying, that sort of that skill in like you know, knowing when to push for a broader view versus just sort of delivering something in the first instance to gain trust, so that you've then got the option to expand the sort of the vista later on, if that makes any sense.
No, it absolutely does. You're reading the emotional climate is critical, and as I said, you have to, I use the word challenge, but you really have to determine how best to work with the client to introduce concepts, and the timing for that. You don't go in there and you know it all from day one. You establish credibility, you get that first release out, etc. But the key thing is, as a developer, you know, you have to challenge yourself to think about how best to make this work for the client, in spite of what the client's preconceived notions might be, and how best to introduce those ideas to the client. And that can be a big challenge. The SHF organization in particular is easy because Susanna is both on the development team, plus she's a member of the board. If we get it past her, we're in pretty good shape. And the people on the board have been very, very open to new ideas and not defensive at all. They've been great to work with. Maybe because they're all women, or I mean, most of them are women. I don't know. I don't want to be gender specific about this, but they're not defensive, or and they're open to new concepts. So maybe it's Sweden. I don't know. Who knows?
But that's great to hear. I think Sweden's got a lot of things going for it. We're all quite envious in the UK of many of the Scandinavian countries seem to do a lot of things right. Yeah, well, and that's just fantastic that we've managed to have that connection between, I think, yourself and various other developers around the world, and this group in Sweden. I mean, I think that in some ways that's the key ingredient for a successful agile project. We might argue is that where you can actually engage with the client. The client's got space to give feedback on ideas, space to listen to ideas, and you can sort of co-evolve a solution. And it's if you don't have that kind of relationship with the client, I think it's difficult for agile methods to kind of gain traction in terms of co-generating a solution.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, that's fantastic. You know, what a wonderful project to have as part of Agile Ventures. Lots of success for SHF going forward. I guess if there weren't more questions to go on the video, I might stop the broadcast there, but create a little bit of space if Pat's got time to hang around for for a few off-air questions, we'll see. But otherwise, thanks again so much, Pat. We appreciate you taking the time to present the project.
All right. Thanks, everybody.